Over the past 3 decades, journalist, historian and staff writer at The Atlantic, Anne Applebaum, has reported on numerous forms of authoritarian power, from the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe to the threat of 21st century disinformation. Her latest book, Autocracy Inc., explores the alarming rise of autocracies and the financial security and technological networks which sustain them and connect them to each other. Anne Applebaum joins me now from Washington, DC for more. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. At the start of your book, you say that the regimes have different historical roots, different goals, aesthetics. Chinese communism, Russian nationalism differ from Venezuela's and Bolivian socialism to North Korea's juice. But you make the point in this book that there is common red threads that connect them. What do you see those as?
So one of the connections is, they simply have an opportunistic and transactional sense that they can help one another. So they, the quasi-state, quasi-private companies in one country invest in the quasi-private, quasi-state companies in another. They share surveillance technology. They share information and control tactics. They watch what one another does. And of course, they also have a common enemy. These are all countries that seek to rule without checks and balances, without rule of law, without independent courts. They seek to control all the media. They don't want any different information circulating in their countries. And so their common enemy is the democratic world, meaning broadly the liberal democracies, but also the democratic movements inside their own countries, because those movements also use the language of rule of law, rights, democracy, transparency, and anti-corruption. And increasingly, their fight against their internal enemies or their internal competitors has become international, and they now see for them, it's a kind of war of ideas. They believe they're in a contest with the liberal democratic world in many different ways.
And that's one of the things that really struck me in a chilling way, the way that you've forensically detailed so many of these different autocracies, and not necessarily the connections that drive them, but that common sense of purpose, an anti-rules-based order, if you will, including that they don't care about by being criticised or by who. Some are stepping away or undermining international rules-based order mechanisms. What prompted you to do this piece of work and to shine such a powerful spotlight on the way that these different countries, people are working, and I guess the impact on the democratic systems as well?
It's something I've been following for a long time. I was actually really inspired by some of the people who I know who have been fighting dictatorships in different parts of the world. I have several Venezuelan friends and colleagues, and when they describe the Venezuelan regime, it's clearly this is a regime that was, it's a country that was the richest country in South America. It was a democracy for many decades. Once it was undermined, and once originally an autocratic populist leader was democratically elected, and Hugo Chavez, and then they slowly undermined the rule of law. It's now the poorest country in South America. It's one of the most dysfunctional. It produces more refugees than Ukraine. And so why is it still going? And one of the reasons is because of Russian weapons, Chinese investment, Cuban help with secret police and repression, Iran, a country on the other side of the planet, which has nothing historically in common with Venezuela, keeps its oil industry going in the teeth of sanctions. They share kind of sanctions busting tactics. The Venezuelans have given visas to Hezbollah operatives so that they can travel around the world, Hezbollah being an Iranian proxy. They're simply now, they see that they have a common interest in shoring one another up. So the weaker regimes are kept going by the stronger ones make money, and the weaker ones. And that, as I said, it was a dynamic that you can see if you're on the ground. I mean, if you're a democracy activist in Venezuela, it's very clear to you, but it's not so clear out to outsiders unless you begin to look at them all across the board. I mean, you can tell a similar story about Belarus. You can look at Zimbabwe in the same way. So once you start, and it's funny, once you start seeing these connections, they become very obvious. The war in Ukraine it was a Russian invasion. It was a Russian imperial war of conquest, and it's now being supported by Iranian drones and North Korean ammunition and now troops probably, as well as the Chinese are helping the Russian defense industry with components and spare parts. You can see the autocratic world beginning to gather around Russia too.
One of the things that you explore and that I was utterly fascinated with is about the slide of authoritarianism and how you would have some countries, and I think you made the point about Venezuela in there, that don't necessarily begin, or at least in a contemporary sense, as a fully autocratic country, but that there's this slide that might be driven by power or by money or by control or the support of those other countries. Is that something that you're seeing happening more and more?
I mean, there's, it's hard to say more and more. I mean, there's nothing inevitable about it. There are countries that head in that direction and then reverse. I lived part of the time in Poland, which is a country that was run by, again, democratically elected, autocratic-leaning populist ruling party for 8 years, and then managed to have a free election and throw them out. So it can be reversed, but I do think that there are patterns. Countries learn from one another, leaders learn from one another. Most democracies nowadays, it's true, fall not because of a military coup or some kind of violence, but as you say, because a democratically elected leader then begins to undermine institutions, and then begins to see the advantage of being connected to the rest of the autocratic world. So it's true that the ways that they help each other in ways that is now advantageous. So there's almost in the book I described, there's almost now a kind of package for would-be dictators in Africa. The Russians will come and give you mercenaries. The Chinese will do trade deals with you if you're looking for a way to capture and hold power. So they do. There are ways in which they're beginning to. If you have the sense that this fact is spreading, it's true that there are many examples of copycat dictatorships.
Yeah, it struck me that was almost like a dictator startup pack that could come with personal protection that would be provided by mercenaries from around the globe. You talked there about democratic leaders in democratic countries who erode trust. You've been speaking a lot about the election that's coming up in just a couple of weeks' time in your own country. What do you see as the impact of Donald Trump on trust and on this broader discussion about authoritarianism?
So Trump has unquestionably used tactics that you can recognize from other times and other places. So this relentless attack on institutions, on judges, on the press, and of course on the electoral system itself, as we saw in 2020. I mean, this is something that would-be autocrats in democratic systems use in order to erode people's sense of confidence in the political system and prepare people for a big shift. That doesn't mean he will do it or he will be able to do it. The United States, unlike, say, Venezuela or Hungary, is a very large country, and it's decentralized. It's a federal system. It's not like if you capture Budapest, then you can control Hungary. If you capture Washington, that doesn't necessarily mean you control California, or Texas or Montana or anywhere else. So it's not going to be something that could be done easily. But he certainly is, given the language that he's using and the behavior that he's exhibiting. I mean, as I said, it's part of a pattern that seems familiar. He's, of course, also somebody who talks a lot about his admiration for autocrats. He thinks, Xi Jinping and Putin are people he admires, the leader of North Korea, despite it being one of the poorest countries on the planet, also somebody he admires. He seems to admire exactly what we were speaking about a few minutes ago, namely leaders who operate without checks and balances, who can do whatever they want. And he seems also to want to be able to do whatever he wants. He's somebody who has a kind of really profound sense of, he has no inhibition, and he wants to be able to act as he wants, when he wants, and to fire generals or sack bureaucrats or, challenge the Constitution. He doesn't want to obey any rules. And he clearly admires other leaders who behave like that. And it's it's first time around he sought to be friendly with them, and second time around he may try it again.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the weeks and months ahead. I'm keen to talk to you more. We are crashed out of time. Anne Applebaum, journalist, historian and staff writer at The Atlantic, author of Autocracy Inc. Thank you so much.